Hello and good morning. Thanks to everyone who's watching this now or later. We're really excited. Man and I are both here today to talk with Mary Isbell, Associate Professor of English at the University of New Haven, about Openlab and how you all are using it there. I'm really excited to chat with you about this. And I guess before we get into it, if you want to maybe introduce yourself and the project kind of briefly.
Sure. Yeah, I am, like Taylor said, a professor of English, and I came into the university really interested in digital humanities. I use that in my research. I studied the 19th century, and so I had done some XML work, and I knew just what was happening in the digital humanities world. But I came to a university that didn't really know much about what digital humanities was, and I wanted to be with people who were also interested in this. So it took me a while actually to, find Openlab. But I guess we'll get into that. But my kind of background is, 19th century literature, digital humanities, kind of becoming very knowledgeable about certain areas of it, but then also very not in other areas. But because it's such a rich community, there's always something I can learn. So I taught myself how to use WordPress at the end of graduate school and into the early days of my teaching at the university. And that's really kind of what led me to OpenLab.
Awesome. So yeah, and that kind of gets right into what I wanted to ask you first is how did you hear about, I guess, WordPress and OpenLab? Usually, at least I think most people find out about them at different times, but maybe that's not the case. So
No, I think I did find out about them at different times. And there was the in graduate school time where I said, oh, WordPress is cool. And I made WordPress.com website and I had a blog for a short time. And then it was digital humanities conferences where I started to say, oh, this is open source software. You can host it somewhere. If you host it yourself, you're not in the freemium world any longer. You can do a lot more things. You can decide what plugins, you can decide what themes. And so then I started to make my way learning about that. And I was right around there because I was on the job market during that time. So the thing I was working on was that, professor website to sort of be marketable. And as I started at the university, I was like, okay, how do I make WordPress sites with my students? I talked to the IT department and they were like, what do you want? Can you tell us exactly what you would like us to do to support you? And they were really, really generous. They set up a cPanel for me and they gave me the ability to create WordPress sites. I did not know what I was doing. They might have assumed I knew what I was doing because I knew enough to ask. So they gave me that. They said, this is your baby. You can manage this. We are here to do things if you need us to, but I really didn't even know what to ask them. And so I built websites for my classes, but I had no way of knowing how to tell my colleagues about it or manage creating accounts for them. And I don't know, I guess it was that I learned that there was something called a WordPress multi-site and then started digging around and found CBOX, found how it had been implemented at the Graduate Center at CUNY, and then realized that there were two installations of CBOX. There was CBOX and then there was OpenLab, and they had customized it at CUNY City Tech. And I was like, that's what we need. This is amazing. If I can just do this. And then I was like, I always feel like I know just enough to be dangerous. Like I can install a multi-site at Reclaim. I know Reclaim because Reclaim does this other thing, right? That I was hosting my website with Reclaim at this point. And then, so I did that. I think I had like, Taylor, do you remember before we transitioned to manage hosting what we were even on? We were like an institutional plan. It cost $100 a year. And
yeah,
it
you
was
were on
just,
an organizational shared hosting plan.
yeah.
And I don't remember how much like storage or any of those number details, but $100 a year. It caps out at 100 gigs of storage,
Mhm.
and it is definitely as obviously it's definitely technically feasible to run OpenLab on it,
Mhm.
but you can really quickly run into issues with lots of people try to access it at the same time, with
Yeah.
it being kind of slow.
Yeah. And so the request again I made to IT was, well, this is our path forward. I would like to install this. It will only cost, like, I wasn't really asking for much, right? I was like, they're going to say yes if I say it's only $100 a year. Just let me get started. And they said, sure, go ahead. We'll pay the $100 a year for you to run this. And so then I did it. And between Reclaim support, which is very generous, and the Openlab team, which is also just always actively building this, I was able to figure out how to do this thing, but I was constantly uncertain. But I was like, whatever, let's just try. And we did that until like last year. We were on that same plan, and it was growing because right along meant, so that was 2019 when we did that. And I can show a couple things about like initial burst of enthusiasm for this existing and like what I built with it and what we were trying to do with it pre-pandemic. And then kind of pandemic occurs, and then a grant happened and we started expanding it. So we can kind of walk through those things. But to answer just the first question, that's the sort of WordPress and then Openlab.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to have you on here today is I personally love projects where you can kind of track back the history of like, we started this with $100 and a dream, you know what I mean? Or whatever amount of money, right? But because I think that is such a good way to do something like this. And it's very obviously like not every single thing works that way necessarily, but so many things can, right? And especially in higher ed where you while you have the all of the stresses and all, you know, teaching is a heck of a job. One of the things you can do is control how you run an experiment like this to some extent, right? You can say, we're going to use this in a limited way right now, and then, you know, hopefully it takes off, and here's how we're going to do that. So I love to see that, and I think there's a lot of really successful things. I mean, that kind of mirror that. I mean, even like Amanda, I think that's kind of similar to your experience with Openlab too, right?
Yeah, mine was like a lot more. It was a lot more limited in what I was able to kind of accomplish just given time and resources. And so but we were still able to have a pretty successful Openlab experiment just within domain of one's own. Yeah. And so that it was a very small little sphere. But then so what I'm most interested in about this story at this point is how, and you already kind of started to dive into it, like what the iterations looked like and what the different stages looked like. And I love how you bring up the context around those seasons, right? It's like initial enthusiasm and then the pandemic. And then, you know, I'm curious how that kind of continued afterwards. But another thing I'm really interested in, hope to hear you talk a little bit more about, is what it looked like to get buy-in from other faculty members and other, to get more people in, what bringing people in looked like, because this is, from what I'm hearing, just you kind of running this out of your class and not really any kind of institutional buy-in, or not that they were against it, but just not, you know, you didn't have that force behind you of like, oh, English department, this is what we're going to be doing now. This is just kind of like one person soldiering in. And so what were those conversations like? What were the things that drew people in that you heard from?
Yeah. So actually that is the place to start, is probably in the first thing I wanted to build with it. And the reason I was so excited to have it was that it would be much easier to get my colleagues who didn't know WordPress to join me in building a WordPress site if we had this infrastructure where, I mean, this is the magic of it, is that in a multi-site environment, it's only people at the university, but anyone at the university goes through the process of signing up. So let's all go to the page together. Let's sign up for an account. Okay, now look for this group I created. Look at this site. Now we're all in it together. Okay, we're going to do something with this. So I could tell that was going to be an affordance of using this model. That, yeah, any WordPress site, I suppose, can be that way, but I don't know. that was cool. So this kind of all happened in the summer of 2019 when I also was, I mean, I'm pretty kind of like, I'm always bootstrapping, trying to get the digital humanities to our university, which meant trying to convince my colleagues that they were secretly digital humanities scholars, even though they didn't know. So I was taught anytime any colleague of mine in the arts and humanities especially mentioned that they used technology in their class or that they were doing different things, I said, you probably never thought about it, but this is really related to conversations that are happening in digital humanities. And I was talking to the provost. Now, we're a small university, so at some schools, it seems like unfathomable to have a conversation with your provost, but I was at that time directing the first year writing program in the writing center at the university. So I was already having conversations with administrators, and I was saying, look, I want to make a proposal for you to fund us all attending the Digital Pedagogy Lab during the summer of 2019. And the output of this is going to be a course that we're going to offer called the Digital Humanities Lab, which we have not very many humanities majors at our university. But we have many students who are curious about the humanities and are also very interested in technology. And so what we were trying to do was design a course that would allow those students to take a 1-credit course that would fit into their regular schedule, because that's the thing. The students might be interested, but they can't put it in their schedule. This is the main dilemma that we often face. So I was proposing a 1-credit course that students could take, essentially to take the content and cool things they were learning in their other courses, but learn digital humanities methods to sort of spruce them up. Like, so you have a project for this class. What if you, because of something you learn in this 1-credit DH lab, you go back to that class and you say, I could give you a paper, or I could also do this. Would you be interested in that? Which is just, it's about kind of sharing the word, right? Like, there's these cool technologies, and also there's these really interesting methodologies of thinking and just ways of making your way through material. So it was kind of all built around that. And so the first, masterpiece I was so proud of was our DH Lab site, which we were all members of, all the faculty who I had wrangled together to be part of this. I made everybody write a bio. We were very visible on that site. And then we used the site to give our presentations. The other thing that I really thought was important was, and this is across the board, it's still extremely important to me now, is to make what happens in our classrooms more visible so that more people can see that it's exciting and that they can kind of come toward it, but also in the spirit of open educational resources, they can use that when they teach, right? So whether it's like communicating these cool ideas on our campus, or it's spreading interesting pedagogies to other places. In either case, having a public website is key, right? And we hadn't even shifted at that point to Canvas, so we were still Blackboard. And just, it doesn't even need to be said. Everything's locked away. Nobody knows what's happening. That wasn't working. So that's what we did. So we did the DH Lab, and that's the first site that I created. Basically, that summer, I was getting it set up. I was trying to encourage people to try it, to tell me if it was easy enough for them. And we went to the digital pedagogy. What is it? Digital pedagogy. I'm blanking because I said DH Lab so many times. It's also called Lab. It's Digital Pedagogy Lab.
DigPed Lab, yeah.
Yeah.
And at UMW, you said
Yeah.
2019. I was there too that year.
Yeah, that's so cool. It was wonderful. I mean, and I had been such a fan of Robin DeRosa's work for a long time, and she inspired me to do a lot of OER projects. And so I got to talk to her then, and we kind of created a connection. So all things sort of trace back to that really rich summer. And then we taught that course in the fall. And so I can show that site if you want.
Yeah, I can pull that up if you're ready. So
it's so this is the homepage of our site, which I can say many things about all the ways I would like it to be better. But this was my first falling in love with the Fluida theme in WordPress. And I feel like my journey with Openlab is just an excitement for new themes, and then a realization that they're hard to use, and that other than me, other people are going to have a hard time making the most of them. And the ones with bells and whistles are probably not the best choice to activate on our lab, on our site. But I did Fluida, and I was excited about it because it allowed us to have these, pull in the individual presentations by faculty members, and then like kind of have an archive of that going back to previous semesters. And so then when a faculty member would give a presentation, like this was the second time I did the Power to Publish, and really just trying to talk to students about the history of like publishing, book history, but also show them all the technologies. I was trying to introduce them to the TEI. My real goal with the DH Lab was like get students interested in these methodologies, because once they get interested, they can do really cool summer research projects on that, and they might not encounter it otherwise. So what I was excited about here and what I was trying to show all of my colleagues was like, I can put a Mentimeter poll at the top of this page. I can take you through different images, and I'm using this as my PowerPoint, basically. So then I have created all of these, as I'm talking, they can look at these GIFs. I'm just like throwing all of the media into my thing. And then I ask them a question at the beginning. And so then we can look together at how students are responding to this question. How do they think about publishing? When do they publish? Where do they publish? And then I show them different platforms they could use to publish. And Tapas at that time was a tool I was using to publish TEI. This is something that they developed at Northeastern. So I was showing them, what's possible there and what markup languages are and blah, blah, blah. So that was DH Lab. And then the pandemic happened. That's the next part of the story. We haven't really done DH Lab in a while. So yeah, I'll stop. You can stop that share if you want. Or maybe, I don't know. I mean, should I just keep plowing through our story? Because I feel like it's a...
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested.
What I like so far about this part of the story is that every step that you're taking is to just lower that bar of entry for folks. I love the emphasis on, taking advantage of the features of Openlab to not only be public, but to be easily copied, right? For your faculty who are coming in, like, this is cool, but that kind of blank page syndrome exists in WordPress as well. So having that template to start from can get people going so quickly. And that's part of what can make all of this kind of grow. And then them also being able to see all the cool stuff that you're doing in your class, and the conversations you're having with your students are right there. And the shift of getting people to think about publishing and what publishing is, understanding it beyond like formal publishing, maybe, and within those formal structures, and kind of making it synonymous with posting as well. I think all of that is, and I love that it's 1 year, just like 1 year before everything changes.
Yeah,
you're able to introduce these conversations so that I'm on the edge of my seat for what happens during the because I have predictions. I'm going to see it.
Great. Okay. All right. So I don't know. I didn't realize that was such a, it is a pretty exciting story. So then pandemic happens. And in that year that I did all this stuff, it's, I think, significant because it affects the fact that I was asked to do the next thing, but I got a teaching award. I was up for tenure that year. Like I was a very busy person. All that stuff kind of happened. So I got the teaching award, which meant that when we went into pandemic and everyone started to use this model going into the fall of 2020, how can we do an engaging summer course that's going to make students actually come? Please, God, come to our school, right? Don't say yes to college, but then say, I'm not going to go to college when I have to mask up and we have to have these terrible classrooms, right? Like this is going to be awful. So we created a course to offer in the summer, and I was asked to teach it. And then we invited students to sign up, and it was a free summer course. It fulfilled a core requirement. It was very cool. And soon the course became more than 100 students. And so it wasn't just going to be me. And so then we started tapping faculty. And it just so happened that some of those faculty were the ones who had done the DH lab with me, but then that group expanded. And so again, it seemed like only natural that we would have the hub of that course be a website made on Openlab. And so that's this course, Pandemic as Social Mirror. And there I decided to step back from Fluida and use the default theme that was there when we, were using this. And I really we met, the faculty who were teaching with me met over the summer in advance, and the course met once a week. We met on Zoom, but we did so much work to make it interactive. I mean, I feel like this is going to resonate for you with this Reclaim TV initiative, even ways of basically broadcasting to students us in conversation, but letting their questions come into it. And so we actually have this really cool, let me see if I can find it. So we made a page for every presentation, and we would have faculty talking about their discipline as it related to the pandemic. But then in advance, we made a Google form that guided students through the task of writing a question to a professor about a presentation they just gave, because these are all incoming freshmen. So we were teaching them, okay, look, here's like a template if you want to use it. Like in your lecture, you said this, blah, blah, blah. I'm interested in this because I wonder, da, da, da. And then we asked them to submit that before our live class. And each teacher had the students distributed into their section. So the teachers, the faculty would choose questions, and then they would say to that student, you want to ask your question live on Zoom, and they would be brought in. And so that was like really exciting. And the class was just so fun. This is all the faculty who made their profiles, right? So students could know them. It was just, and it was public. It was just out there. And also what happened in the end is that students were given the option to make their final project public on this website. And it was just huge. I mean, I've been trying to recreate the spirit of this collaborative class ever since it happened. And you can't, because it was built out of crisis, and it won't ever happen again in this way. But I got so much closer to these faculty, and it was just very cool. So, I mean, Openlab facilitated it beautifully, made it all very visible, and helped students get acquainted quite easily with creating things in WordPress, and the faculty, honestly, who hadn't used WordPress before.
I love what you said about this experience was built in crisis, because I guess I was right with my prediction, which was that all of this work that you did ahead of time helped you enter this emergency situation, or as you said, crisis situation, with a level of sophistication that a lot of places didn't have the opportunity to have. It was more like slapdash, right?
Yeah.
But you were able to, you had all this infrastructure set up already so that you could really bring students in with something that's exciting, something that doesn't feel like it's desperate, which I think a lot of students were. And when I say desperate, I mean like emergency, we're just throwing this together.
Right.
But it's more like, don't worry, we know what we're doing. You can come be with us, and we will, help this feel natural and exciting. So I think that's amazing.
Yeah, it was. And it also did something for us that I was missing, and that I was seeking out through the digital humanities, which was community among arts and humanities faculty at an institution where professional degree programs are the day, right? That's sort of what students come for. And in the pandemic, we all were on the, we were threatened by program closure, as many were, right? And so this suddenly was what I always knew we needed, but we also did something within our College of Arts and Sciences that was extra special because of the training we had as arts and humanities faculty, and we could showcase that, which was the beginning of me, I still am working on this to this day, making visible the things we do, so that it's recognized that even if a student's not majoring in the humanities or the arts, it's an important component of their undergraduate experience. And so that's kind of, that's what has lasted, especially from this and the community that we formed doing it. So then the next part of the story is that we had this class But in that same summer, we had been working on a grant proposal for the Davis Educational Foundation. And as the pandemic happened, so it was going to be for interdisciplinary studies major and building it. We had been working on that, but then the COVID happened. And then suddenly it was like, let's just shift this and let's think about how open pedagogy in general, which obviously is demonstrated in this course, would be a beneficial thing for our university, and how can we ask for a grant that would help us build open pedagogy at our university. And Openlab was an important platform I highlighted in the grant proposal, because I said, look, this is how we're going to teach faculty how to do this. This is a tool they can use. We want to teach them how to use this tool, da, da, da. So then over the course of we got that grant in 2020, and over the next 3 years, we had funding to have faculty receive stipends over the summer to adapt one of their existing courses to use open pedagogical practices, which means learning about OER, what it is, how to use it, but also how to engage students in the work of co-creating knowledge and making work that might become public, and doing all that kind of thing. So what we know is that faculty can't make these kinds of changes just in the middle of the semester. Like, they need time, they need community, they need to be able to think about what they want to accomplish and how other people have done it. And so that grant really kickstarted a cohort of faculty who learned about that and who used Openlab in the process. And again, it was really important for me for them to experience what it was like to be in a website with other people. So during those summer fellowships, they were writing posts, in our site and seeing, okay, I can make that private or I can make that public. Our site is right now private, but I wanted them to understand that it can be as closed down as we had shifted to Canvas at this point. It can be as private and closed down as Canvas, or it can be as open to the public as you want it to be. And so that was really great. And if you want to show the site that we made there, I went back to Fluida. Actually, one thing that was really important for me, I don't know where, I think I did put it down here at the bottom. Just judge me fully for like how bad my design skills are. I made this page. I still think that this is like so silly, but it was really important to me to chronicle how this website changed over time. So I was using the Internet Archive to take snapshots of the site at different points in history, because the overall argument I wanted to show faculty was, look, take the out-of-the-box theme, start making a website. Don't worry necessarily about how it looks, but just get your students using it. And then over time, you can either work with your students to make it more beautiful, or you can change it from semester to semester. So I was doing this here.
I love that.
I love demoing that like that for a couple of reasons. And I will say, like, it's good to be instructive in that way of saying, this is how I do it. You can do it that way too, and it's okay. But B, it's another way of introducing kind of, I think, subtly a tool that, especially I think maybe for humanities brain folks, they'll be like, oh yeah, this is one thing I can sort of version this. Right?
Yeah.
And using this tool that's free to use, that anyone in the world has access to, I can do that pretty simply. Even if you didn't sit down and explain, this is what the Wayback Machine is, whatever, they're going to kind of encounter it through that process. So
yeah, and I love that this is an example of working in the open rather than only publishing in the open.
Yeah.
Right. Because those are two different things.
Yes.
Like, we can all publish things that are pretty and perfect exactly the way we want and feel good about that. But I think it's a big shift for people to be like, this isn't going to be perfect from the get-go, which can stall you, but rather encourage people to make it not perfect and work through that and see how it changes.
Yeah. And that was actually the biggest thing I learned because suddenly I was in a position now of helping faculty learn. It was professional development training I was doing. I wasn't teaching students so much as I was collaborating with colleagues, right? And the really most important thing for them to understand was that all of these changes can be iterative. You can do a tiny bit of it, then you can do more of it. You can adopt an OER textbook, and you can have your students come up with ideas on how they want to make it better. And then the next semester, you can have them actually maybe revising it. The other thread of this, and you might notice that this is like, let's take some time and tell me where I should go to change. Why is Pressbooks the sort of icon that's showing up on all of these? I have no idea. I don't know how that snuck in there because we have an entirely separate Pressbooks network at our university now because of this grant and because we sort of started working in Pressbooks. So anyway.
That's probably a question for your hosting company. You should get in contact.
I know.
with
I
them.
should ask Taylor to solve that for me, which he usually does when I say, Taylor, please, if you could just use your brain instead of me spending 5 hours figuring this out. So that's the Open Pedagogy Project. And that is probably the primary way that faculty started to try to use this. Once I made it available, I sent out a few, like, this is available to all of you. Let me know if you want my help, if you want to try it out. And a couple people got in touch with me who didn't do the fellowship program. And I sat down with them and showed them what was possible. I even saw some people potentially familiar with WordPress separate from our university went to the homepage, realized that they could make an account, created something. And so the theater program was suddenly, organizing the theater production using an Openlab site. That was so cool. They never even asked me anything, but over the years of the grant, I also invested some of our grant funding in having Bree replicate the help site that's really rich at the City Tech Openlab for us. So we had a more robust help page and a set of, so we can actually look at that if you want.
That's when you know your project's made it, is when you've got a something you wasn't even aware it was being used for, and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
look at this. That's I always hear that. I had that experience myself as like a domains admin, and it's always really rewarding to be like, oh, this thing has like a life outside of me just like pouring time and energy into it.
Yeah, there were also business writing faculty who were having students create portfolios, and that was just popping up. I knew nothing about it. So this was like the smartest thing I ever did. And this was when I finally realized that though I am enthusiastic, I also have not enough time to be the sole manager and handle all of the things that need to be done for this. And so, grant funding certainly facilitated this, but honestly, I reached out to our Office of Digital Learning and let them know what I was doing. And they said, oh, this is wonderful. We're so glad you're doing this. And I said, what I really need is someone to provide support for me in the questions I don't know how to answer as the admin of this. And they said, well, yeah, just let us know and we'll pay the invoices for you to have someone who we don't employ on our campus. So I don't know if anyone's watching who is at a campus where, I don't know, I think one way to think about it is that their focus in educational technology and support is for the learning management systems that the university has invested in. That's where they put their energy, and that's where the people who are there to support it know how to answer questions. If that's your situation, then don't be afraid to ask that team if they would support someone who's a specialist in the open source technology that you're using to kind of come in and assist you. I don't know if there's anybody crazy enough to do this at another institution who's a faculty member, but do, because it's awesome. But that made it a little less overwhelming for me, because I would get a little overwhelmed when I realized that I had created something that I had not anticipated all kinds of, like, it could break, right?
Yeah.
Somebody could be really let down. And there were some people sort of in the open pedagogy situation who did the fellowship and then were really excited and then launched into the semester. And then they were like, my students have all these questions about WordPress and I do not know how to answer them. Like, I don't even know WordPress well enough to teach them how to do this. And so they just quit it, right? They quit using the website in that semester. And I think that's fine. If we had all the infrastructure in the world and there was a place for them to go ask questions and I was just available every day, all day to answer their questions about it, maybe they would have stuck with it, but we're not in that situation. So I'm okay with them trying and then figuring out a different way. I don't think that's a failure.
Yeah. And you're definitely not alone in that situation.
Okay. All right.
Say, from the Reclaim side, we see this constantly.
Okay.
And, obviously there's things we can do to help support folks, but the type of support you're talking about is is different. It's about being like directly available for
Mm-hmm.
faculty and often students even in a direct capacity sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And what was it like? I mean, I don't know if you can share like how did you how so you found someone who would say, "Hey, we'll pay for that," but like did you just Google somebody? Like how did you find people
Oh,
to
the
help with
person
that?
to do it? Well,
Yeah.
I don't want to get the person who does it to get more requests, but it's someone related to the team at
Okay.
City Tech. I mean, I think that there's people familiar with WordPress all over the place, but what I
Yes.
did, because the Open Lab community now has, and did even then, there was an easy way to reach out to ask questions, but now there's actually an Open Lab for support for Open Lab that isn't
Mhm.
City Tech's Open Lab. It's a distinct place that if you're starting one up and you want to learn about it, you can join that Open Lab. And we probably could put the link or something. I don't have that handy right now, but I know Charlie's watching.
Yeah, I was
Um,
gonna say Charlie may be able to link that. Otherwise, I'll try to
Charlie's
find it
like,
real quick.
Mary, do a better plug. So because actually, I think I reached out to Charlie and I just said, can you help me find someone? Because I don't have enough time to do justice to this. And I think this is what I need. And she recommended someone. And I think that probably is a good place to start.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the benefits of being able to have a community like what exists with Open Lab and open source culture being plugged in and just kind of networking from there.
Yeah. And for me, it was okay. I kind of thought of myself as like, I need to get the money to have enough support to build the things so that then our institution can realize that this is actually something they need to fund more in a more substantial way because it's such a good return on investment. Like it is a worthwhile expenditure. And that meant that I think for a little bit too long, I tried to do it for too cheap. Like that's a big lesson that I learned was that keeping it at the $100, I went longer than I needed to, which meant people were encountering the site where it was slow, really slow. And once we shift to managed hosting, it's just snappy and lovely. And I don't have to worry about that anymore. So that was, me figuring out how to not think, oh, we're going to probably have to keep it like this because this is all I can manage. Like there's ways of expanding out from that.
Well, and what I would say, like, I think that's a good problem to have. You know, so many projects. As I kind of mentioned earlier, I do personally love it when you can see a project grow through like infrastructure as well, because
Mhm.
so many projects have the opposite story where they're like, we couldn't do anything and then we went for the expensive thing and then nobody used it and it only lasted a single year,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, well, a year is not long enough for something like this to
Yeah.
blossom, right?
I have to say one other thing that happened because of that community, but because we were getting together with the Open Lab creators and sort of talking through things, and they were inviting everyone in who was using Open Lab to join those conversations. That's how I met Ed Beck. And Ed is a regular like receiver of questions from me. So I'm like, Ed, how do you handle this? How do you do this? And he's just a genius. And he's the one that got me realizing that probably this could provide everything our university needs to encourage students to create their own portfolios. There's tons of expensive e-portfolio software packages that are being regularly advertised to our IT, VP. And they don't know that actually they're already investing in something that could support students creating portfolios. And so Ed's been working on that, and he got that kind of question from admin and administrators. And so I kind of hearing that story from him, I know that there's some work happening in the provost office to start thinking about career readiness for students and how would e-portfolios be part of that. And I just sort of sent a little message and said, just so you know, I'm happy to give you a tour of this tool that we already have at our university. If we wanted to just sort of bump it up a little, we could actually have students using it in this other way. In which case, again, I'm not managing that. If we did that, there would be some new resources allocated to sort of expand further. I don't know.
It's that's kind of a magic conversation too. That's
Mhm.
hard to it can be hard for all the stars to align for those things to happen, right? But that's one of those things where I always like to try and help when I can, kind of help faculty understand, like, here's like the IT language you can use to kind of sell, and not, this is the least important part, right? The important part is what's happening, what are we doing with it? But like there's also this component of, this is an open source tool, right?
Yeah.
And that means that we have a lot more power and leverage in this, in how we're going to use it, and we can host it with Reclaim Hosting, but you know, we wouldn't have to, right? Like it's not getting married to Instructure at Canvas, you know, for Canvas or whatever. And I would say, like, having that argument be part of these conversations is a way to kind of win on board IT departments. And not that they're the only folks, they're not, but that's one of my favorite things about something like Openlab, is you can take this and say, this is a fantastic platform that is created sort of by teachers for teachers and students in a way that most aren't. But also you have a lot more power and control over how it gets used.
Now, let me tell you a funny thing. And Taylor, you know about this other dream project that's building out of other things, related to me recognizing that a WordPress site is a database, a relational database, which is magic. The thing that happened when I sent that message was that the first question I got back was, would that allow us to track which students are doing it and tie that into our own data structure of sort of what students are doing and how they're engaging at the university? And my answer was, I'm pretty sure yes. And especially if you make it single sign-on, right? If you make this part of our university's single sign-on situation, then yes, you are going to have all the data you need to figure out how students are engaging, which was exciting to them, because I think what they're sold, I don't know what these conversations are like, and I don't really understand the technology 100%, but what they're being sold is ease of access to data that will help them accomplish their goals pedagogically and for accreditation. And so that's like, this will manage it for you easier, but actually that could be very possible with this as well. I'm getting in the weeds here. We can get back to talking about Openlab.
So, sorry. So where did we leave off in the story?
Okay, what I kind of want to show you is like different ways we're using the sites, just for people who, how many other conversations you've had about Openlab, but the way that I thought about it when I first started was that it was more about having a public, managed by me site that showcased what the course was, and then could, for students who wanted to make their work public and who followed the requirements of the assignment and made sure that they weren't violating copyright, could feature their projects, right? What I didn't want to do was just have them all publishing in the open without recognizing what that meant. And so I, for a long time, was creating what I kind of came to call perennial courses. Like, the course is the same website all the time, and I don't create a new course. I keep building, I keep having students join in. And I wasn't, when I did it that way, having students use the platform until the very end to create an account and go in and take their final project and put it on the website. And that was the way I used it. And that meant that they were all quickly learning WordPress at the end of the semester. And that was fine, because the only ones who wanted to share their projects were the ones who were curious enough to do that work. And that's how I built it for a while. So I can show you, this was like, I taught a course called Algorithms in the Arts, which was inspired by my frustration with our reliance on recommender systems, and just sort of having students think more critically about how those algorithms function and how we encounter creative works like film, books, images, etc., music. And so I just, it's fluid again. I didn't know what to do with myself. So I used this open source image as the homepage, and then everything's just from here. And then I had some students with featured posts. 3 of the students decided to make their work public. And that was exciting. But then a colleague of mine who did the Open Pedagogy project, the way he took advantage of WordPress, he had a bit of experience with WordPress before we started. He was just like, and I think this is more the City Tech way of using Openlab. people are like, it's a semester's website. Students are blogging constantly. They're all in the site together. And I was like, oh, that's different than how I was thinking about it. And so I saw what he did, which was so cool. He had this course called The Music of Texas. And it was all about students writing posts all the time to share things they were finding, and basically using a system of tags and then curating what emerged to kind of highlight the things students discovered, and, you know, really showcasing like just a big mess of stuff. And I remember when I looked at it, I was like, whoa, this is crazy. And also they were so engaged with WordPress and making in it all semester. That's so cool. And so he would keep the site private all semester and then make it public at the end. And that something clicked for me. And I was like, oh, and it's weird because I think that's even how a lot of people use it at City Tech, but it finally clicked for me. And so when I was designing a course for last semester, that's how I structured representations of nature, where students were going through units based on natural phenomena, representations of natural phenomena, species, predators, invasives, and their projects involved them finding and presenting to their classmates these representations of these various topics. So we're all talking together about species and how we decide what a species is and the history of that. And then they're all picking a species and finding representations. And for each assignment, they're making posts, which means all semester they're learning how to be better and better. The coolest part of it is that I can be chill at the beginning about copyright and understanding attribution statements because it's a private site. And so they can go Google and find whatever image they want and put it in there. I can tell them in passing, you might use Openverse, you might go to, you know, Flickr and search for, you know, CC BY images, but mostly I can just like let it be. And then the final project involves them going back to their posts and revising them to make them public if they want, right? And so then they go back and change those posts they made before, revisit the ideas. And then so what you're seeing here is the stuff that students wanted to share. This is not everything students wrote all semester. But I also fell in love with Anders Noren's themes. So this Koji theme is just like, I love it so much. It's so simple and it does such beautiful things with the images no matter what. The Fluida was always weird with images. So this is so exciting to me. And this is how I'm structuring the semester. Like I'm teaching algorithms in the arts again, and we're doing it this way now. The other thing I'll show you that I just feel like I have to mention is a major mistake that I made, which I don't know if others have. If you have, please confess. You too. Have you ever been seduced by Elementor?
We have feelings about Elementor.
I'm sure you do. I have a lot of feelings about Elementor too.
Our whole website is based on it, to be clear. Like we do use it.
Serious? Are you serious?
It's a very powerful tool. You can do a lot of amazing things with it, but it's complicated and there are things to know about using it for sure.
I would not use it personally.
I will never use it again. But here's what happened. And here's like mistake that I would not make again, I hope, but I don't know. I might still do it again. Because I have a sandbox. Openlab is my sandbox. I can do whatever I want. I can turn any plugin on that I want and play with it. I forget that it's also then available for everybody else on the site. And so I was playing with Elementor. I hate to admit it, introduced it to students as a possibility when I was teaching writing for digital environments. One student suffered through and came up with something interesting, but it was not the right choice. And I don't think I'll do that again. But in the process, one of our open pedagogy fellows, and I won't actually show it because I actually think they're in a process of transitioning. So here's the story. Open pedagogy fellow, math professor, wants to build a website. I don't know if she chose Elementor or that sort of found her way to it and then was like, whoa, I am out of my depth. Like, I can't do this. But we had a budget attached to the Open Pedagogy Fellowship. She found a student who could use Elementor to give her exactly the site she wanted. And so she did that. And they made an extremely beautiful website that I could have never made. And then I was cleaning up Openlab and I was like, I have got to turn Elementor off. Nobody should suffer from what I went through. And I did that this summer, like a fool. Bree warned me not to do this. I turned off that thing and I got an email August 18th-ish from this professor, something's really weird with our site. Nothing looks right. Like everything's broken. And I was like, oh my God, you were using Elementor. And I had no idea. Ed has a plugin he uses that allows him to see who's using what things.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to use that. I need to know
we
better.
recommend the multi-site plugin manager, I think is what it's called. But there's a plugin that lets you see where things are being used, but also even restrict. You can say this is still installed, but only available to these sites. There's a handful of ways to do that. So
okay, that's a solution then, because what I told them was, oh, I know my mistake. I hope when I turn this back on, it's going to fix everything. And thankfully it did. But I said, also, I'm going to want to turn that off eventually. So if you want me to work with you, we can try to work toward a different theme. But if I can just let them keep it and not make it available to other people on the Openlab, that's a good solution, because it was beautiful. And when I looked at it recently, it doesn't look the same. So I think they're already trying to transition to a different theme.
Yeah, there's that. There's a couple other options, like of archiving a version of the site. But my thing with Elementor is there is a type of person, especially design focused person, who can do things that I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Like because I'm not really like that.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. And but for most people, I really do think sticking to the tools inside of WordPress, especially now that there's plenty of people who have plenty of valid complaints about the block editor, but you can actually do a lot of design work in there, which is great. So
yeah, and I'm not all about the whole site editing either, to be honest with you.
We have very mixed feelings about it here. I think there's some, but what I would say is for most people, I think it's a good alternative to Elementor.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I would always recommend that as a step toward making all of those decisions for yourself. I'm showing another one that this came out of the Open Pedagogy Fellowship, a psychology faculty member. And again, it's a faculty member who puts a graduate student on the task of building. And that worked out really beautifully here. So they have a lab showcasing the projects and what they're doing. And that's a project on our site. I don't know. I shouldn't say anything about ACF, right, Taylor? Except I really want to say that ACF has changed my life. And now I'm making new post types and I'm having new ways of using Openlab with that.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I do think it's worth talking about and kind of illustrative of the sort of power of, WordPress in general. And the fact that Openlab is built on top of it means you inherit a lot of the flexibility of WordPress. So it can do more than what you might think out of the box. It can do almost anything, sometimes in a confusing way, honestly. But
yeah. And this is another thing where I wouldn't want to set someone loose with ACF. So maybe I should make it only available to certain sites, kind of like we were talking about with Elementor, with the site that exists already. But it was Ed and it was you, Taylor, who helped me understand that there's plugins that allow you to create new post types. And this was an issue for me with representations of nature. Actually, it was a different one. It was in this modernisms course. So this is also the public version of our final iteration using this Koji theme, which I love. But I was also having students create posts to do discussion reflections at the end of class, which I thought was great because it allowed them to keep it private and just share with me or share with the class things that they didn't get to say in class. And that was wow, so exciting. But it also meant that they were written quickly at the end of class. They didn't have featured images and they were cluttering up our beautiful homepage. And so what's happening now is I can have another post type called discussion reflection, and it doesn't feed into the homepage. And that was a really exciting discovery that's just a plugin away. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, it's great. And I will say I kind of wanted to quickly circle back to, because your discussion of kind of some of the other ways you've used private and public, right? You had a faculty member you worked with who made the whole site public at the end, or you've had students who get to choose what becomes public near the end.
Yeah.
Those are two sort of modalities that I really haven't thought about. Like
Oh,
I kind of, I mean, I'm sure there's probably other folks who've done that, but it's very easy, at least for me, to kind of think about like, well, it should be public because then we get all of these benefits of
mm,
working in the open. And
mm,
of course, that's not correct for everything. There's some
mhm,
certain things, but there's a lot of anxiety around that, especially
mhm.
for a teacher who's new.
Yeah.
They have justifiably a lot of questions about how that works,
Hmm.
all of the copyright concerns. Like you said, I love the idea of making that be something students have agency in and they get to choose. I think that's fantastic.
Hmm.
But even in the sense that you really are working on an artifact together and no, this is all going to be public or this subset is all going to be public,
Yeah.
having
Yeah.
that be a part of the journey in the class, not front loading it and saying we're going to learn all this stuff so that we can do the other stuff and
Yeah.
say we'll get there when it makes sense to.
Hmm.
I think is a great way of thinking about that work.
Yeah, I think it takes the iterative idea of faculty professional development that you can use this in your class right away, and it puts it right in the classroom. So it's, you're going to do this work, you're going to do it again and again, and you're going to get better at it. And then once you feel confident, you can return to the work you did at the beginning and do the additional steps needed to make it public if you want. Like, I love that because it lets them engage with it without that barrier to entry of the technology. If it doesn't work, the technology is not working for you, you still can get at the ideas, and I'll give you feedback on that. I love that. And then if you stop sharing for a second, I'm going to find one little thing that it was kind of part of the Open Pedagogy project that I built this page. And I think I still have a lot more that I want to do with it, but this is how I used it. So yeah, you can share again. This was a page I created on my first year writing website, but that I point to every time. End of the semester, I say, okay, let's talk about all the ways to find and use openly licensed content in your work. And so I take them through. And I spent a lot of time thinking about the overlap between citations and attribution statements. And I'm doing like this because it's a Venn diagram where there's times when you're going to use both. And that's always really hard for students to understand. So I made a Prezi that I'm really proud of and that I keep adding things to. And then, finding images and how to do it. And I had made videos for our fellows, for our faculty fellows. So I just put it on here. This is not good yet, right? It's not there, but this is the kind of resources that I'm sharing in that final phase of the semester when they're deciding if their final project is going to involve looking at the work they did already and making it public. This is where I want them to go, and this is how I want them to navigate it. I'm not going to lecture on this in class. I wanted them to seek it out and have it be clear when they want it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, and it's again, I think a great way of also, I don't know, it's maybe hard, and maybe I should avoid this compulsion of mine to try and like separate these things out at layers. But I also love that, and I think this is instructive in how you're doing this for students too, because this is how work happens,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I love any time in the context of a semester long course we can demonstrate a longer than semester long
Mm-hmm.
thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also, yeah, the resource does. I mean, I know you said this is quote not good, but it does look pretty good to me so
I
far,
think
at
it.
least.
I think it's just kind of like hard to take in. I still don't think that I've laid everything out well. So that's all. You can stop sharing it since I don't think it looks good.
Well, thanks so much. This has been a really fun conversation for me, and it's been amazing seeing what you and folks at New Haven have been doing with Openlab. It's been awesome to have Charlie Edwards in the chat here too.
Yeah.
And I should mention too, probably should have mentioned this at the beginning. That's my fault for being a bad host. But if you're curious about OpenLab and you're like, what is this tool? We do. There are links, of course, in our Discord. But if you're watching this later, go to CBOXOpenlab.org. You can learn a little bit about what OpenLab is. We also have other videos on Reclaim TV, and we did a community chat with some folks from the OpenLab team a few months ago now. But I would recommend checking that out too to kind of learn broadly about that tool. But I think you did a really awesome job, Mary, about highlighting some of the strengths of it in terms of, you know, the controls around modality of public and private, and being able to clone things and build on top of things. This inherent structure of Openlab showing organized around classes, but you having the control of what that looks like. It could be semesters. It could be I like the term a perennial class website. I'm gonna totally steal that.
I actually use like perennials and annuals
Yeah,
for
it's
our
perfect.
template sites. Yeah.
I've always struggled to explain that to folks because there are reasons to do either way, and I like that. So thanks so much. This was a
Thank
fantastic
you.
conversation.
Yeah.
This was awesome. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thanks.
And that's it for today, and we'll see everyone next time. Thank you all for watching.
Bye.